Hey everyone, this is Steve. I wanted to give you a little update on the uh, Codecademy WordPress assignment. I've read through all the reflections for everybody who's handed something in, and I've looked at the Codecademy exercise completion document, the screenshots at the end, and I've also looked at what your WordPress site looks like now. If you are complete, because I wrote success and then you're done. If you're not, I wrote some more comments about things that you need to do to finish the site up, you finish up your WordPress site. And in some cases, I'm not sure. This looks like there's a couple people who didn't do the Codecademy exercises yet. It's interesting to read. I think that I could. What I got from reading a lot of these reflection essays is people saying like, "Wow, this took a lot longer than I thought it was going to," and I'm like, "Well." I said it was going to take probably at least 10 hours to do those exercises. And I also said, if you haven't done this sort of stuff before, it is going to take a lot of time. I don't know this for sure, but I kind of get the impression that some of you might not have believed me entirely, as in like, oh, I do web stuff all the time. I do all kinds of computer stuff. This is not going to be a big deal. Well, it's very time consuming. And I think that there's actually, and also some people were talking about frustrations of it and stuff like that. There's actually some lessons behind that I don't say explicitly in the assignment, but it is part of the assignment. One of the lessons behind it is frustration helps people learn things. And if you get frustrated by some task that you're supposed to complete and then you figure out how to complete it, you have learned something in a way that is going to be much more effective than if I had said, first do this, then do that, and then do the other thing. One of the other reasons I do this is because the reality is that this is how people learn how to do this stuff, right? In other words, this is how people learn how to do this stuff in the workplace, but it's also how people learn how to do this stuff and just for fun, which is to say, you kind of have to just noodle around with it and sort of figure it out, right? So the assignment's designed to set up a task that is going to be frustrating and that is going to take you out of your comfort zone, but that's on purpose, right? And so if you've made it through that and you feel better about yourself for having made it through that, that's part of the goal. Um, how is this going to like play into other things that you're going to end up doing in the class? Well, when it comes to the Codecademy exercises, to be really honest, you're probably not going to have to work with code too directly. That's because most of the WordPress stuff that you'll be using will just be text and images and things like that. And that's really the big assignment is like making this website with WordPress and that's coming down the pike. But it's really useful to know some HTML because sometimes you have to try to code things within the WordPress site, and knowing a little bit of HTML and CSS can help you do that. It's also useful just as a sort of general overall understanding of how the web works. Um, Remember, part of the goal of this class is it's part of the professional writing program of things. And so this is one of these classes where part of the goal is to give you a set of skills and a set of theories that you could potentially take into some sort of job someplace. So, for example, I've been teaching this class for a long time, and I've had students in the past who did the HTML, CSS kinds of exercises like that, became very interested in them, and then themselves began doing a lot more coding. I've also had students who've taken this class, made websites, done the things that we're doing here, and they're employed as a writer, like they're the tech writer for some entity, and but they don't do the web stuff or whatever. But now they have a better understanding of what goes into making the web stuff, and so now they can have conversations with the computer guy. It's usually a guy, but you know what I mean. The computer person who does do all the coding and things in ways that can help. That they can have a conversation with each other. It's also useful because it kind of explains some of the conventions of the web. For example, you may have noticed that 99% of text on the web is paragraphs that are blocks of text that are not indented, and that the paragraphs are separated by returns. You may not have understood why that was the case before, but maybe you know now from the coding. That's because to make an indent in HTML and CSS is a pain in the ass. So people don't do it. So instead, they make these paragraph breaks like that. So again, knowing a little bit about how coding works really helps you see a little bit behind the curtain. And I think that that's important to just have a grasp theoretically. The other thing that's important about this is knowing about WordPress is that this is how the web works nowadays. Okay. Most websites you see are literally professionalized versions of WordPress. And if they're not professionalized versions of WordPress, there's some other kind of software that's now called a content management system. Okay. These are systems that are set up so that users can enter in text relatively easily. And you saw this once you started entering in text onto your WordPress pages. It's just a matter of typing in a few simple commands. And then administrators of these websites can change things easily and rearrange things in all kinds of other ways. Um, it it's also software that supports dynamic kind of web sort of activities. So, for example, HTML and CSS, those exercises are designed to make what's called a static web page. That is, the web page basically doesn't change. Most web pages are dynamic. So if you think, for example, of every time you go to Amazon and you enter a different search, you get different kinds of results. The content fills that space in a way that is not possible with just HTML and CSS. Social media platforms are the same way. The social media platform always looks a little bit different tied to the user in terms of who the user's following and what sort of other algorithms are in play with the user in terms of how they're being advertised to and things like that. Again, something that you couldn't just do with just HTML and CSS. But the thing is that, again, content management is really what WordPress and these other systems are about. So that's why it's important to know these things. I want to show you a couple of real quick things on the website to help those of you who are still trying to finish this up. Okay. Okay, you will of course recall that this is the assignment itself. It's really important to read this in some detail because this assignment does spell out everything you need to do. Okay. So again, this describes some of the stuff that I just talked about in terms of why we're doing this. This is talking about like use the free versions. I will grant you it is annoying that WordPress keeps trying to sell you things, but it's free. I don't know, maybe if you want to buy access to WordPress for the more professional package for a year, if that's worth it to you or not, hard to say. I have on this page a description of everything you need to have for a successful WordPress site. I also have an example. This is my example of what you need to have. You got a main page here with some text, maybe something that says about where there's a picture, there's at least a link. And then this drop down menu arrangement here where you have a parent page, and then underneath it, you have a child page. It doesn't necessarily have to say exactly child and parent, but it's got to have something along those lines like that. Okay. Also, as I mentioned at the beginning of this process here, right up here, I do have some instructions for how to set stuff up with WordPress. This walks you through the whole process. The one thing that gets kind of tricky is how to do these drop-down menus. And the reason why that's tricky is because how you configure the drop-down menu with parent and child pages and things like that depends on the version of the theme that you're using on WordPress. Okay. This link here is fairly okay. I mean, to use what you really, the real key thing is that do you see this working for the site editor, the WP admin, or the customizer? Okay. And you have to play around with this a little bit, but if you look at this, all these instructions, instructions do work. Okay. Last but not least, what I wanted to share here is there is a list of people here who have successfully completed this assignment. These are all folks that are all, for those of you who are still working on it, are all resources now. In other words, if you've got a question about how to do something, I would ask one of these people too, because they figured it out. If you finish the WordPress assignment, if you finish this assignment entirely by the end of the day on Wednesday, February 5th, um, you'll get an A on it. Okay, I'll give you 150 points if everything is correct. After that, the grade is going to go down. So the grade will go down to probably a B, and then if it lingers on longer than that, it'll go on down to a C. This doesn't include any penalties that you may have accrued by turning something in late. So that's still part of the formula. Um, A little bit of a tangent here. I didn't give as many instructions as I should have about sharing Google Docs in class. We will come back to this with the last two assignments. It'll be much more important then because we'll talk about that in terms of the composing process and turning it in. But you have to share them with me so that I can edit them. And I'm interested in seeing that because I want to see the version history of the document. But we'll talk more about that later with the next two assignments. Um, I think that's it for now for the WordPress Code Academy things. If you have questions and if you're stuck, ask me because that's part of what I'm here. It's why we started this assignment as long ago as we did, because I set up these spaces for people to ask questions as they were working on it. And I hope that one thing that you've discovered, if you waited until Sunday or so to start working on this thing that was due on Monday, that's doesn't really work with the web. The analogy I like to give with the making a website is, and I don't do this personally, so I'm just sort of guessing that this is how it is. Making a website, and this is what you're going to be doing for the last assignment, don't forget, so I'm telling you this now, is kind of like knitting a sweater. Okay. What I mean is that knitting to me strikes me as a series of very repetitive tasks. You're doing very similar things again and again and again. You got to pay attention to how you're doing those things because you change colors, you change stitches and stuff like that. But it's fairly simple, repetitive tasks, and that's kind of true with making web pages and things like that. But the thing is that you can't make a sweater overnight. It takes time, and it's the same sort of thing with your website. So we're going to start moving into the last two projects of the semester, the social media and the analysis and the website project. Both of these projects are we're going to be going back and forth on in terms of how we're working on them. But what I'm telling you is that at this stage, you really do want to start thinking, at least conceptually, of how you might put together this website on WordPress about the work of the work that the text that you've chosen that's in the public domain that you want to like represent on the web. Obviously, we'll talk a lot more about what that all means, but what I'm getting at is that it's a good time to not stop messing around with WordPress. Look at some of the other functions that are out there. See if you can't figure out some other pages to create. See if you can't figure out some different sort of themes to play with, just to see what it does. Right? Again, you have to kind of noodle around with it, and that's how you learn how to do this stuff. Okay, I think that's it for now. Like I said, ask questions, finish up. See you online.